The Enchanted Island by Ian Serraillier. Chapter 1. The Taming of a Shrew. A Wildcat for a Wife. In the Italian city of Padua lived a wealthy merchant named Baptista and his two daughters. Catherine the elder was known throughout the city for her scolding tongue and was so fiery-tempered that no one would marry her. Her sister Bianca was gentle, modest, and beautiful. She had already more than one offer of marriage, and was much attached to her young tutor Lucentio. But her father refused to hear of her marrying until he had first found a husband for Catherine. One day a young man named Petruchio arrived in the city. High-spirited and easy-going, he was on the lookout for a rich wife. He had heard all about Catherine's temper. But a woman's tongue held no terrors for him. He had been a soldier and was used to the clang of trumpets and the thunder of cannon. It was enough for him that she was pretty and had plenty of money. So he went to Baptista's house, told him who he was and where he came from, and asked him if he might court his daughter. "I hear that she is beautiful, and has delightful manners," he said. Baptista thought him a little blunt, as well as misinformed, but he had once known his father, for whom he had liked very well. "You may see her if you wish," he said. "She is in the next room having a music lesson, but I'm afraid you may not find her quite as you've been led to expect." Petruchio was not going to be put off. He at once raised the question of Catherine's dowry, and was told that at Baptista's death he could count on having half his estate and 20,000 crowns. Just then there was a crash behind the door. The music master rushed into the room, his head sprouting from the body of a shattered lute. "I complained about her fingering, and she has broken my head," he groaned, "and she had the impudence to call me Twangling Jack and other horrible names." "I admire her spirit," said Petruchio. "It makes me long all the more to meet her." Baptista hustled the music master out of the room and went off to send Catherine in to meet her suitor. "Good morning, Kate," said Petruchio as the haughty lady swept in. "My name is Catherine," she pouted. "No, it isn't. You are called Kate, and Bonnie Kate, and sometimes Kate the Wildcat. But I think you are the prettiest Kate in Christendom. Gentle, beautiful, modest, and kind. Yes, I've heard all about you, and I've come to ask you to be my wife." She slapped his face. He caught her arm and held her fast. While she struggled to break free, biting her lips and scowling, he told her that the dowry had been agreed and he was going to marry her whether she liked it or not. But Baptista came back. Again he let her go. She ran to her father and reproached him fiercely for wanting to marry her off to a mad ruffian. "How did you get on with her, sir?" Baptista asked nervously. "Very nicely, thank you," said Petruchio. "In fact, we have fixed the wedding for next Sunday." "I'll see you hanged first," said Catherine. "You wouldn't believe how much she adores me," Petruchio went on. "She hung about my neck, kissing me over and over again. I'm off to Venice to buy the rings and wedding clothes. Will you make the arrangement for the banquet, father, and invite the guests?" "Give me a kiss, Kate." He grabbed her and snatched a quick kiss. She tried to slap his face again, but he dodged her and escaped. Sunday came, and the wedding guests gathered outside Baptista's house. Catherine remained indoors in the sulkiest of moods, for the bridegroom had not yet arrived, and was already more than 2 hours late. She was convinced that he meant to leave her in the lurch, and that all his talk about marriage had been mere tomfoolery. At last they heard the ring of hooves on the cobbles, and Petruchio appeared, riding a knock-kneed, back-sacking old horse with old stirrups and a moth-eaten saddle. He was dressed like a lunatic and was wearing an enormous new hat, an ancient coat, and patched breeches with a broken-hilted rusty sword that he had taken out of the town armory. His servant Grumio, looking just as peculiar, was riding behind. Everyone was horrified. "Where is Kate? Where is my lovely bride?" said Petruchio, with a glittering smile. "Surely you're not going to marry her in that outfit," said Baptista. "Why not? She's marrying me, not my clothes," said Petruchio. "But where's Kate? It's high time we were in church." He ran into the house, found her trying to hide behind a bench, and dragged her off to church. During the wedding service, he behaved in the same mad way. When the priest asked him if he wished to marry her, he yelled out, "By God, yes!" The poor man was so startled that he dropped his prayer book, and when he stooped to pick it up, Petruchio boxed his ears and knocked him down again. All the time they were being married, he kept stamping about and swearing. Then he shouted for a glass of wine noisily, drank everyone's health, and threw the dregs in the sexton's face. Finally, he gave his wife such a smack of a kiss that the whole church echoed. Baptista had provided a splendid wedding banquet, but Petruchio had no intention of attending it. As the minstrels and the guests were entering the square on their return from church, he suddenly halted the procession, stopped the music, announced that he was in a great hurry and must take his wife home at once. Nothing that Baptista or Catherine said could make him change his mind. Catherine was his property now, and he meant to show who was master. "If anyone tries to stop me, I'll sue him," he cried. Then he turned to his servants. "Grumio, draw your sword. We are surrounded by thieves. Protect your mistress like a man." Hauling Catherine over his shoulder, he marched her off, kicking and screaming, while Grumio walked away backwards, covering their retreat with his sword. "Where are the servants?" Petruchio shouted, cracking his whip on the table. "Nathaniel, Gregory, Philip!" They came running in and lined up in front of him. "Why weren't you at the door to hold my stirrup and take my horse?" he thundered. "Go and fetch my supper." They scuttled off to the kitchen. However brusque he might be to his servants, to his wife he was gentle, courteous, and good-humoured. He took her arm and led her to a chair. "Welcome home, Kate, and cheer up," he said, then started bellowing for someone to take off his boots. A thick-set fellow stepped forward, but Petruchio found him so slow and fumbling that he lashed out with his foot and sent him sprawling. When another servant brought the water for his wife to wash in, he bumped into him on purpose, and basin and jug were smashed into pieces on the floor. Then he swore at him for his clumsiness. "He couldn't help it," said Catherine in tears. "He is a beetle-headed, flap-eared idiot," was Petruchio's reply. "Come to the table, my dear. I know you must be hungry." He removed the covers from the dishes and stiffed the joints. "It's burnt," he shouted, and threw it on the floor. "There's nothing wrong with it," said Catherine, who was almost fainting with starvation, pining for something to eat. "I tell you, Kate, it's all burnt and shriveled up. It would be much better for us to go without," said Petruchio. He shouted for the servants to clear the stuff away, then without waiting for them to finish, hurled half the plates and dishes after them. He took her upstairs to show her the bedroom, and at once he found fault with the way the bed had been made, and started throwing the pillows and sheets about the room. She spent the night sitting in a chair, and if she nodded off for a moment, his loud voice, storming and swearing at the servants, woke her with a jolt. So poor Catherine, who had already gone without her supper, went without her sleep as well. And all this was done, she told herself bitterly, for her pleasure and comfort, in the name of perfect love. Next morning she came downstairs to find the breakfast things laid, and Grumio standing by her chair. But there was no food on the table, and she was dizzy from lack of sleep and starving. All her life she had had everything she wanted. Now for the first time ever the proud Catherine had to go on her knees to a servant and beg. "Please, Grumio, find me something to eat," she pleaded. He pretended first to be appalled by the request, then to be sympathetic and obliging. "Would you like a calf's foot, madame?" "I'd love it." "I'm afraid it might make you ill," he said doubtfully. "What about some fat tripe?" Catherine clapped her hands and begged him to fetch it. But Grumio had his doubts about this too. He suggested some beef and mustard instead. Then, when she asked for it, invented more objections. Finally, she lost her temper and boxed his ears. She was chasing him out of the room when Petruchio came in, with a dish in his hand. "Hello, Kate, why are you so upset?" he asked. "Cheer up, my love. Look what I've brought you. I've prepared the meat myself." He put the dish down on the table and lifted it off the cover, but she refused to even glance at it, so he told Grumio to take it away. "Please don't take it away," said Catherine quickly. "Then you must say thank you," said Petruchio. There was a long pause, and Catherine bit her lip. At last, most reluctantly, she whispered, "Thank you." Then she sat down, seized the knife and fork, and attacked the meat ravenously. "Now, honey, we're going to pay a visit to your father's house," said Petruchio smoothly as she wolfed away. "It's time we gave some thought to what you are going to wear. Silk gowns, hoop petticoats, hats, gold rings, ruffs, scarves, fans, beads, and amber bracelets, and so on." When she had finished eating, he called in a tailor and a haberdasher. They brought a pile of cardboard boxes done up in bright ribbons, and set them down on the floor. The haberdasher unwrapped the hat that Petruchio had ordered and showed it to him. "Much too small. It's like a walnut shell," said Petruchio, throwing it across the room. "Show me something bigger." "It's quite enough for me, and fashionable too," said Catherine. But when Petruchio ignored her, she stamped her foot and shouted, "Why can't I speak? I'm not a child." "You're quite right, my dear," said Petruchio. "It's a very poor hat, and I love you all the more for disliking it." "I don't care whether you love me or not. I like the hat, and I'm going to have it." "Ah, you want to see the gown," said Petruchio, and he called the tailor who had just unpacked a splendid red velvet gown and was spreading it on the table. But Petruchio could find nothing right with it. "Do you call this a sleeve?" he asked. "It's carved up like an apple tart." "That's the latest fashion," said the tailor. "And it's beautifully made," said Catherine, who had been examining the stitchwork. But Petruchio was furious. He called the tailor a nit, rolled up the gown, and threw it at him, then kicked him and the haberdasher out of the room. Of course, it was all a part of the game he was playing, and they would be paid later on, but he didn't intend for Catherine to know this yet. "Come along, Kate, we will have to go to your father's in the clothes we are wearing. They are very ordinary, but never mind. Grumio, go and fetch the horses. It's only 7 o'clock, my dear. We should reach your father's in time for dinner." "I think you're wrong, sir. It's afternoon already," said Catherine. "We won't get there before supper." "Don't contradict. If I say it's 7 o'clock, it is 7 o'clock. I see I shall have to postpone the journey a day or two until you've learnt better manners," and he stalked out of the room. It was several days before he thought her obedient enough for him to risk the journey, and he set off with her and Grumio for Padua. On the whole, he was pleased with her improvement, though not yet completely certain that she'd never argue with him. There could be no harm testing her to find out, and while the party was resting at the foot of a steep hill outside Padua, he saw his chance. "How lovely the moon is tonight," he remarked politely. "It's the sun, not the moon," said Catherine, equally polite. "It's the moon." "I know it's the sun," said Catherine, without raising her voice. "Very well, if you insist on contradicting me, we're turning back for home," and he shouted to Grumio to fetch the baggaging horse which had gone ahead. With her father's house just over the brow of the hill, this was more than Catherine could bear. "You can call it the moon or the sun or the candle or anything you like, so long as we can go on." "It's the moon." "Of course it's the moon." "No, it isn't. It's the sun," Petruchio snapped. "Very well, it is the sun," said Catherine, smiling. "It's whatever you'd like to call it." They both remounted, and the party set off slowly up the hill. They were almost at Baptista's now. Had she learnt her lesson perfectly? Petruchio decided to try her once again. Soon they caught up with an old gentleman on a scraggy horse, which was staggering up the hill. Sweeping off his hat to him in an elaborate greeting, Petruchio said, "Good afternoon, madame. Where are you going?" Without waiting for an answer, he turned to his wife and said, "Have you ever seen a pretty old girl, my dear? Her eyes are twinkling like stars. Give her a kiss, Kate." "Your parents are very lucky to have such a lovely daughter," said Kate, without a flicker of hesitation, and she gave the astonished old gentleman a dainty kiss. "Kate, are you mad?" said Petruchio. "This is an elderly gentleman, not a girl. Look at his wrinkles." "I beg your pardon, sir," said Catherine to the old gentleman. "The sun is so dazzling and makes everything look green. I'm afraid I made a mistake." "That's better," said Petruchio, and he asked the old gentleman to join them if he happened to be going their way. "I'm visiting my son Lucentio in Padua," was the reply. "Lucentio?" cried Petruchio, highly delighted. "Why, he's in love with my wife's sister, Bianca. She comes of good family, and is extremely rich. They're probably married by now. A splendid match, a splendid match." "Are you joking, sir?" said the old gentleman, wincing under the grip of Petruchio's hearty handshake. "Come along with us now and see for yourself," said Petruchio, and they all rode on to Padua together. Petruchio's guess was right. With Catherine wedded, Bianca had lost no time in following her example. She and Lucentio had been married that very morning. In fact, the newcomers arrived right in the middle of the wedding banquet, and late as they were warmly welcomed. Among the guests were a young man named Hortensio, and a rather domineering widow he had recently married. But he and Lucentio were delighted with their choice of wives, both of them so different from the Wildcat Petruchio had chosen, and they couldn't resist making a few sly jokes at his expense. At first Petruchio took little notice, but when Baptista, after the ladies had retired, joined in the joke against him, loudly claiming that Catherine was undoubtedly the wildest and most wilful of the three, Petruchio strenuously disagreed. "I'm sure that Kate is the most obedient," he said, "and if you don't believe me, I can easily prove it. Let each of us in turn send for his wife, and we'll see which one is the quickest to obey." "I bet you 20 crowns that Catherine won't win," said Lucentio. 20 crowns, said Petruchio scornfully. "Is that all you're willing to risk?" "Well, make it 100, said Lucentio. "Done," said Petruchio, and they put their purses on the table. Lucentio was the first to start, and he sent a servant to fetch his wife. The message that Bianca sent back surprised them all. She said she was too busy. What a disgraceful answer, said Petruchio. Hortensio, careful to make his orders sound like a gracious request, tried next, and his look was one of a blank dismay when the servant came back alone. Your wife thinks you must be joking, sir. She says if you want her, you must go to her. Worse than ever, said Petruchio, and everybody laughed. It was his turn now. Confident that Catherine would not disappoint him, he sent Grumio to fetch her. Goodness gracious, here she is, exclaimed Baptista, as Catherine came sailing in at once, all smiles and wifely obedience. She curtsied to Petruchio and asked sweetly if there was anything she could do. Go and fetch your sister and Hortensio's wife, said Petruchio. Another curtsy, and Catherine went out without a word. Amazing, said Lucentio. I wonder what it means, said Hortensio. Love, contentment, and a quiet mind. That's what it means, said Petruchio. The right person is master in my house. And he pocketed the 3 purses. Baptista was so delighted with the change in his daughter that he added another 20,000 crowns to her dowry. When she brought Bianca and the widow in, both highly indignant, they were all treated to yet another proof of her submission. Catherine, your hat doesn't suit you, said Petruchio. Take it off and throw it on the floor. She obeyed at once. The widow was horrified, while Bianca considered such extreme obedience merely silly. I wish you were all as silly too, said Lucentio. You've lost me 100 crowns for this evening. The more fool for you on taking on the bet, said Bianca. Catherine, tell these pig-headed women how to behave to their husbands, said Petruchio. So Catherine, who now realized how foolish and ungracious had been her former behavior, and was much enjoying playing the part of a humble and obedient wife, delivered them a pretty lecture. With a twinkle in her eye, she told them that frowns and scornful glasses spoilt a woman's beauty and were hurtful and unkind, nor could sullen, peevish, or aggressive behavior ever be justified. A husband who took care of his wife and worked hard to make her comfortable and secure had every right to expect from her obedience and love. It was a small debt to pay. Everybody listened, Bianca frowning and the widow with smoldering resentment, while their reproachful husbands devotedly hoped that they would act on this advice. As for Petruchio, who had proved so excellent a teacher, he relished every word, and at the end of the speech clapped heartily. Ah, that's the wife for me, he said, beaming from her ear to ear. Come over here, Kate, give me a kiss. He sat her on his knee, and she threw her arms round his neck and kissed him. And that is the end of this chapter. Make sure you guys check out the next chapters to come. Thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment.